Good morning. We are on Lamed Vav Amud Beis 36b. We discussed the listing of the names of the tribes as they appeared on the two shoulder stones of the high priest. And the Mishnaic text told us that the number of letters totaled 50, 25 on each stone. And when we do the count of the names of the tribes, we only reach 49. To which the Gemara responded yesterday, two explanations. One is that the letter Hey is added to Yosef's name, Yehosef, citing the verse in Tehillim which says, Eidos bi Yosef Shemai, testimony to Yosef, and there when it says Yosef, it says Yehosef with the extra Hey, testimony to him that the day he emerged in the land of Egypt, and that, as we looked up yesterday, is referring to the day that Joseph came out of jail on Rosh Hashanah. So that's one suggestion of how we get to 50, by adding a letter Hey to Yosef's name. And the Gemara's second suggestion is that Binyamin, which is ordinarily spelled with one Yud, Beis Nun Yud Mem Nun, in this instance, considering that this is the way it was written, or considering that this is the way it is written at the moment of his birth, is with two Yuds. Binyamin, Beis Nun Yud Mem Yud Nun, second Yud, giving us the total number 50. So, having discussed this idea that the letter Hey is added to Yosef's name in that verse, Yehosef, and as well as the extra letter Hey as it's written out on the shoulder stones of the high priest, the Gemara now launches into a discussion about why it is that God's name is put into his name. With the added extra Hey, you have now a part of God's name. Yehosef, the Yud and the Hey at the beginning being God's name, similar to Yehoshua. But in the case of Yeshua, the letter Yud was added to go from Hoshea to Yehoshua, but the Yud Hey becomes God's name. Here's the reverse. His name starts with the Yud anyway, Yosef. And now we add the Hey, Yehosef, now have God's name. So the Gemara is going to discuss what he did and how he did it, the circumstances and so on, that brought him that honor to have God's name embedded in his name, the letter Hey.
Sarai was also right.
Sarai was switched letters with Yeshua, right?
Sorry?
The Yud from Sarai goes to Yeshua, right? There's a number of such instances. Yaakov to Yisrael, Avram to Avraham.
Your father told me Avram doesn't exist.
The Torah says that from now on, he should no longer be called Avram. From now on, he's called Avraham. And from that point forward, we don't hear Avram again, which is not the same thing as Yehosef. He's not called Yehosef from then on. He's called Yosef, as well as Yaakov and Yisrael. He's referred to as both, even after he changed his name to Yisrael. But I guess that was probably the rabbi's discussion at that class, but that's not for now.
Because every time they called me at Cornelia, it's Avram Benos.
Should be Avraham.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so now the Gemara's discussion on why the name of Hashem appears in Yosef's name, he gets that Hey. That discussion is in conjunction with the fact that Yehuda's name doesn't just have two letters of God's name, the Yud Hey, which itself is God's name, but it's God's name made up of two of the full God's name, Yud Hey Vav and then a Hey, whereas Yehuda has the entirety of God's name in there with the Daled, but it's Yud Hey Vav Daled Hey, but all four letters of God's name are in his name. The Gemara is going to contrast why it is that Yehuda has the totality of God's name and Yosef only part. The higher half, the Yud and the Hey, but still only part.
Kids.
Yes, we'll discuss that. Yeah, we'll discuss that. Now, this discussion actually we had earlier, but here it's a bit more elaborate. So let's begin. The line begins with the words Binyamin, and the last three letters are Omar Rav Chana Bar Bizna. think that's to pronounce the name. You have it there. Amar Rav Chana bar Bizna. Rav Chana, son of Bizna, says, Amar Rav Shimon Chasida, in the name of Rav Shimon, the pious one. Yosef, Shekidesh Shem Shamayim. Yosef, who sanctified God's name, Baseser, in private, no one else is around. Sorry?
I was just following along.
Yeah. Haisifu love, they added to him Ois Achas, one letter, Mishmoi Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the name of God. Adding the letter Hey, making his name have Yud Hey, that's God's name. We're going to get to the story. We'll get to the story in a moment. But he sanctified God's name in private. Yehuda, Shekidesh Shem Shemayim B'Farhasya. Yehuda, who publicly sanctified God's name, the story which we'll also get to. Nikra Kulei Hashmei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His entire name is named by the name of God, as the entire name of God has appeared in his name. So let's begin with the story of Yosef. This is the end of the statement of, I think this is the end of the statement, or maybe his statement continues. I'm pretty sure this is the end of the statement. And now the Gemara analyzes what this means. So Rav Shimon the Chassid said that Yosef gets the letter Hey, getting part of God's name in his name because he sanctified God's name in private. What's the story? So Yosef Mahi. Yosef, what's the story with Yosef here?
Who gives this?
God does.
So God spoke to him?
No, it appears in Tehillim. Later, it appears in Tehillim. His name is written now, Yosef. That's God's doing. That is that his name should appear with an extra Hey. Whether God communicates that to him or not is not the point. The point is, it happens that the letter Hey is added to his name, giving him God's name. Whether God spoke to him or not is not really the discussion here. I mean, there's no indication that God communicated this to him. Maybe yes, I don't know.
How else did he have gotten it?
By the fact that it appears in Tehillim that way. So as a matter of fact, it's there. Whether he knew about it or not, but as a matter of fact, that energy is there. Okay, so let's see. What's the story with Yosef? Says the Gemara, the verse reads, this is when Yosef is a servant in the house of Potiphar, and he is seduced by the maiden of the home, the woman of the home. And there the verse reads, Vahi ka'hayoim hazeh, and it was on that day, Vayovei habayisa, and Yosef comes home, lasais malachtoi, to do his work. What do you mean to do his work? What work? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, end of the verse. Amar Rabbi Yochanan comments, Melamed, this indicates to us, Sheshneim, that both of them, both Yosef and Potiphar's wife. Yeah, I don't think so. So Shneim, both of them, the Dvar Aver Niskavnu. They both intended to be intimate. And that's what it means. He came to do his work. He came to do his work as a euphemism for he came to do his business. That would be the modern euphemism. Meaning he intended to go through with this. Right? Now the verse continues. Okay, apropos to that, sub-discussion. So Rabbi Yochanan says they both intended to do their business. Apropos to that, the Gemara raises a similar discussion between Rabbi Yochanan's students, actually, Rav and Shmuel. Where they discuss this verse. The verse says that Yosef came to do his work. Rav and Shmuel were discussing what this means. He came to do his business, to do his work. Chadamar, one says, Lasais malachta mamish, literally to do his work. He's a servant in the house. He literally came to do his work. Chadamar, another one says, Lasais tzrachav, to take care of his needs, take care of his business, his urge needs. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan says they both intended to be intimate. Rav and Shmuel, one of them at least, agree with that position, that he came with the intention of being with her. And the verse goes on to say, Nichnas, he enters, the Ein Nishban She'abayis, and no member of the house is there. But Gomer, etc. Asks the Gemara, Efsher, is it possible Bayis gadol kabayis shal oisei rasha. A home the size of the home of that wicked one. Not just the home physical structure, but he was a leading figure and he was part of the leading aristocracy in Egypt. You can imagine a guy like that had, on an average day, 30, 40, 50 people roaming the home. All kinds of butlers and servants and maidservants and who knows what, staff and advisors and so on around his house. So a house that size and no one's there, just him and her. What's going on?
There was a holiday, right?
So Tana, we learned the Rabbi Shmuel, the house of Rabbi Shmuel, in Rabbi Shmuel's study house, they taught the following. That day, Yom Chagam Haya. It was a day of their holiday. V'holchu kulan, and the entire home went to their house of worship. And she tells the group, the rest of the household that's going to worship, I'm not feeling so good. Because Amra, she said to herself, I have no day upon which I can get Yosef like this day. Because I'm never going to be alone again. Right? This is the problem with being in the royalty or being in the aristocracy. You're never alone. You have no privacy. So she finally found a day when there's going to be privacy because everybody's off to worship, which is reflected in the verse. The verse says, and it was on that day. When it says, and it was on that day, there's a k, meaning it was like that day. Meaning there's something unique about this day that allowed her to do this. Now the Gemara explains. What was unique about that day is because everybody went.
She dismissed him.
So here the Gemara is saying that they all went to the idol worship. So they were going anyway. So she lies in bed, I'm not so feeling well, you guys go, I'll stay home. And now she can get Yosef. So at this moment, it's the perfect moment for Yosef if he wants to sin. And we have to, put ourselves into his shoes to understand what he went through. It's on a human level before you get to Yosef Tzaddik. Or in fact, the fact that he didn't go through it is why we call him Yosef Tzaddik. Because he's alone in Egypt. He's very handsome. He's got no wife. He has no children. As far as he's concerned, he has no parents. He has no sibling. What exactly what would be the consequences if he were to be with her?
For him, like on a
Nothing.
halachic level?
Not on a halachic level, on a human level. Like if someone's ever looking to get away with something and not get caught.
You just have to be in debt to her.
Yeah, but right.
There's no real consequential.
Because he has nothing. His parents think he's dead.
Right.
His siblings think he's dead. He's here alone in the world.
Yeah.
Like what consequences are there? This is like the perfect.
He's not married.
It's not married, no kids, no obligations, nothing tying him to anything. So and what if they don't like him there? He runs off to somewhere else, and no one knows who he is anyways. An anonymous guy in the world. Like if there's ever a circumstance in which someone can easily slip into nihilism and say nothing matters and just do whatever I want, it's Yosef. He's a completely anonymous fellow.
And how old was he at this time?
Young man.
Yeah.
In his teens. With all the desires of a teenager. The modern equivalent of this is being alone in business in China for a month. Who's supposed to know anything of what, of where, when? Unfortunately, many a man fall to this. And especially in those days where there's no communication, who's going to find out what? His parents are going to find out he did something.
Cameras.
No cameras, no WhatsApp, no communication. His parents are going to know. His parents think he's dead. No one's going to know anything. Someone's going to know. He's an anonymous fellow. He's a foreigner. He's an exotic foreigner. Doesn't speak the same language. He's handsome. He's young. On a human level, it'd be very difficult for someone to withstand this. And the verse goes on to say, this is how far it went. Quote from the verse. V'tifseu bebigdoi lemar. And she grabbed his clothing, saying, and the verse, etc. And the verse goes on to say, lie with me. And he left his clothing in her hands, and he runs out. If she held on to his clothing to the point that when he runs out, he left his clothing behind, you can imagine how close he was. Close enough that his clothing are off him, and she's holding it.
Yeah.
To stop at that, it's very dangerous, but to stop at that point is exceedingly difficult. Exceedingly difficult.
That's how the Midianite women were able to.
It's exactly. That's how the Midianite women got the Jewish people.
Almost the point of
That's right.
intimacy.
And then stop right there and say, bow down. And
Yeah.
the guy loses himself. He can't think straight anymore. Yeah, this is incredible. It's an incredible strength for a young man like that, just on a human level, before you get to like the spirituality of the story of Yosef being Yosef. Just on a human level. It's an excruciatingly difficult moment in his life. And he runs out. So there's two things the Gemara analyzes here. A, what gave him the strength to run out? And B, what are the tactics he used? What are the tactics? The Gemara is going to address both of those. So says the Gemara, here's where he pulled the strength. But I say Shah at that moment, Basa the Yuknei Shel Aviv, the image of his father appeared to him. The near Salabachaloin and appeared itself in the window. Amar Loi. And the image of his father said to him, Asidin Achicha Sheyichtavu al Avnei Ephod. Your brother's names are one day going to appear on the shoulder stones of the high priest. And your name is going to appear amongst them. That's the plan. Would you like it? That your name should be eradicated from amongst them. You shouldn't be listed amongst these people. And you'll be referred to as the one who pastures amongst the harlots. That's what you want yourself to be. This is not the end of the story for you. You're not an anonymous fellow. No, you're not. You're part of a lineage. I'm your father, Yaakov. You're part of a tribe. You're part of a tribe with a very serious destiny, and it's your choice. Do you want to be part of it or not? It's going to happen. And your brothers are going to be listed on the high priest, and this is going to be the epicenter of the world, the purpose for all of life. And here's your choice. Do you want to be part of it?
It's like Aesop,
Or do you want to be, yeah. The verse reads, there's a verse in Mishlei which says, the man who loves wisdom, his father shall rejoice, and the one who pastures amongst the harlots loses all of his treasure. Both literally, the person spends money on all that, but also metaphorically, the person loses who he is, loses his dignity, loses who he is as a person, loses his destiny. Right? So this is where he gets his strength. He gets his strength from the tzaddik, Yaakov, his father, who reminds him of his lineage, reminds him of his destiny, and lets him know you're not alone in the world. You're not an anonymous fellow. It so happens that you're anonymous here. In this tiny circumstance, no one knows who you are, but you're part of a much larger story. This is where a Jew can harness that power to implement what he has to, self-control, whatnot. To remind yourself, you're not alone in the world. You know, it's like a guy who's not married, single, and he's driving a car. You drive a little reckless. Why? Because why not? It's fun. Take a little risk. And his wife and kids are in the car. All of a sudden, he's not driving reckless. Hold on a second. Either the reckless driving is dangerous, and you should never do it, or the reckless driving is fine because you have control. And even if your wife and kids in the car, who cares? But there's something about hurting myself. Okay, so I damage myself. I'm dragging down others in my family. There's something about that makes us reflect and think of the value of who we are when it's in the context of a story that's larger than us, as a family, as children. And this is what the tzaddik Yaakov reminds Yosef. He says, you're not alone in the world. So you didn't sin. No. The Jewish people's destiny is relying on your behavior. There's a history. There's a future. There's a context. You have brothers. Right? It's like the past, present, and future is all in this moment. There's the past represented by Yaakov himself, his lineage. There's the present. There's your brothers. And there's the future. There's the future of the high priest's names. You're not just the accident floating in the ether that if you did something, it would be irrelevant. There's no room for nihilism. You're part of a story. And everything you do changes the story from the past, the present, and the future. That's where a Jew can harness the power and strength to say no.
The only thing I don't understand in that is his father thought he was dead. So how can he appear in the window
The image of his father appeared. The image of his father appeared in the window.
Must have been his imagination.
Yeah, it's probably something in his mind, but
Yeah.
or God planting that thought into his mind. But this is the message he's receiving that gives him the strength, right? This is similar to in Tanya in chapter 14, where he describes the Beinoni. The Beinoni is the person who has to have self-control, right? Because the tzaddik has no urges for negativity. The Beinoni has urges, but has to control himself, right? This is the hero of the book of Tanya, the man who has all the urges of a regular human, but controls himself. So the first tool he gives you, he says like this. He says, a person should remind himself, I am Jewish. And like every other Jew on the planet, I have an intrinsic connection to God. And I want to step away from that. I don't want to be an idiot and step away from that essential connection we all have as Jews. There are other Jews who make that mistake, okay, because they forget that truth. But I don't want to be an idiot and do that. And that's kind of what's happening to Yosef. As my brothers, we're all Jewish. We all have that. We're all written on the stones of the high priest. That goes into the Holy of Holies. We all have that deep inherent connection. I want to throw it all away for what? For 5 minutes of fun? My history, my future, my brothers. I can't do such a thing. So this is where your harnesses his power. And what are his tactics? So now that he feels like, okay, I got to step back from this. I got to run away. So how does he do it? So first says the word miyad. Immediately, as soon as this thought came to him, these words come from the blessing that Yaakov gives to Yosef at the end of his life, before Yaakov, the father, dies, after coming down to Egypt and meeting his son and so on, meaning years later, right? Yaakov blesses each of his children, and the blessing that he gives to each of his children are linked to their life experience and the future destiny of that tribe. Right? That's how the blessings are articulated by Yaakov. It's a real poem in which is woven both prophecies about the future of each of these sons and the tribe that will come from them, as well as their life experience, their past history. So here the verse reads, I'm opening it up on the computer here. It's Genesis 49, verse number 24. So I'll read from verse 22, which is when Yaakov starts speaking about Yosef. He says, a charming son is Yosef, a son of charm to the eye. This is the verse we quoted a couple of days ago, that he's oile ayin, he's above the eye, right? That's this verse. And the verse continues, of the women, each one strode along to see him. Right? Everybody came to see him, including this woman. They heaped bitterness upon him and became quarrelsome. Yeah, arches despised him. In other words, they're all jealous of him. So they either wanted him or they couldn't stand him because of the beauty of who he was. Right? That's the story of his life. Now, in this context, where women love him and likewise are despising and jealous of him, says the next verse, Yaakov again describing blessing Yosef using his life experience. But his bow was strongly established, and his arms were gilded from the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there he sustained the rock of Israel. Notwithstanding the fact that everybody wants him, notwithstanding they're all despising him, his bow was strong established, didn't fall, and his arms were gilded with the hands of the mighty Jacob. Jacob reminds him that the image of Jacob reminds him not to sin. And from there, he sustained the rock of Israel. From there, he was capable of being on the rock, on the stone of the high priest. The Gemara now is going to break down these three statements of the verse. Number one, his bow was strongly established. Number two, his arms were gilded from the hands of the mighty one Jacob. And number three, from there he sustained the rock of Israel. The Gemara is going to break these three verses down in context of the story we just read. Okay, so let's see. Rabbi Yochanan explained the name of Rabbi Meir. What does this mean? His bow, what's the language? His bow was strongly established. What this means is, his bow, yeah, that's literally what it means. But it also means his sexual urge. That's also referred to as a bow because of the manner in which seed is expelled. It's like a bow, you pull back and then it shoots forward. That literally a bow, you pull back and it shoots forward. So there's built up tension physically within the organ, and then it shoots forward. So it's referred to as a bow. So that bow was in its full strength, right? He was ready to be with her, right? But then the verse goes on to say, the next half of the verse was, and his arms were gilded from the hands of the mighty one, Yaakov. So he used his hands, the strength of his hands, instead of using the strength of his hands for that bow, he used the strength of his hands to stop it. How so? Noatz Yodov Bekarka. He stuck his hands into the ground. Yeah. The Yotza Shichvas Zarai, Mibein Siparna Yodov. The literal translation is, and the seed emerged from the nails of his finger.
That's right.
That's literally what it means. But perhaps it doesn't mean literally seed came out, but perhaps it means the urge. The urge was expelled in the, like even physically, if you're, all of a person's intention and strength and energy and excitement is attached to that bow in the moment of desire. So you have to almost like distract the mind and put it somewhere else. So sticking your fingers in the ground will do that to you because there's an overpowering, literally an overpowering physical feeling that a person has in sticking his fingers into the ground that would calm his mind down and retreat that bow. So it could be literally that the seed came out of his hands, or perhaps it could mean the urge of that seed is dissipated by the feelings of sticking his hands in the ground. So there's the tactic. The tactic is divert your attention.
Maybe his seed just spilled rather than.
But that would be, that's not what it says here. That would be, that would also be a minor sin there, because that might be a minor sin considering that it's a wasted seed. Here the Gemara is saying it's not a wasted seed, it came out of his hands. But I think it means the urges were dissipated from his hand. And there's the tactic. You don't fight the urge by engaging with it. You do that and you're just making it bigger. Completely divert your attention somewhere else. Divert your attention somewhere else. Because if you're focused on fighting the urge, it's not the way to go. You have to completely divert your attention somewhere else. Right? There's obviously something about the metaphor of the ground and the nails. Right? The nails are like a very extraneous part of the body, and the ground is, the symbol of humility. Right? Something about that, the nail interacting with the ground, something about the humility there that helps him.
Like klippa.
Yeah, the nail is
The
klippa.
ground is reconnecting to the source.
So, yeah, something like that, where like the extraneous energy that almost went into negative is being redirected to a positive place, something of that nature.
Like a bolt of lightning that just hits the ground instead of it.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So I haven't exactly figured out exactly what this means, but it's something to that effect. And clearly on the basic level of the Gemara, it means divert your attention somewhere else. Completely divert your attention. Then the verse goes on to say that where did he get these? The verse said, and his arms were gilded. So instead of saying gilded, which is vayafaizu, we said you can trace it as vayafutsu, as in like he planted them. That's what Rashi tells us to do. Planted them in the ground. Right? And then the verse says, from the hands of the mighty one Jacob. Right? Because Yaakov from the hands of the mighty one Jacob, meaning who is the one that what's the word? Gave him the strength to secure his position that later he'll be written on the stones of the high priest's shoulders. Who gave him that strength to be able to divert his attention and thus saved him from being erased from those stones? Avra Yaakov, the mighty one Jacob, right? That image of his father reminding him of who he is and where he's coming from, what his future is. And therefore, Misham Roya Evan Yisrael. From there, it says the literal verse is from there he sustained the rock of Israel. But the word sustain is the word Roya, which can also mean pasture or shepherd. In this case, what this means is not he sustained the Jewish people, but he sustained the Jewish people. He became the shepherd of the Jewish people. Misham Zachav and Nasa Roya. From this, he merited to become one of the sustainers, one of the pastors of the people of the Jewish people. Shneimar, as the verse reads, Roya Yisrael Hazina. The verse reads in Tehillim. The verse reads in Tehillim. The pastor of Israel sing forth, Noye Katzon Yosef. Yosef leads them like a shepherd leads his sheep. Leads his sheep. So Yosef never actually became a shepherd of the Jewish people. He did actually for a while when the Jewish people came down to Egypt, he sustained them. But on a broader, more large level, the Gemara describes, the Yerushalmi actually, describes Shiva Royim, 7 pastures of the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron, Yosef, 7 tzaddikim of our history will become the shepherds of the Jewish people. And each one of them provide the Jewish soul with a certain strength. Moshe with Das, is explained in Tanya chapter 42. Aaron with love, is explained in the Torah. Each one of these shepherds provide the Jewish soul with a certain character. So Yosef, given the strength that he did, that ability to be the tzaddik, which is Yesod, the ability in Kabbalah, the ability to be able to retract the bonding of negativity and divert it to the bonding of positivity, fingers in the ground rather than in this woman, that strength, we are each in our soul given the strength to be able to do that from Yosef.
And that
Who lived it
strength,
out.
and that strength he acquired was manifest in his subsequent circumstances, such as when he was imprisoned and
Yep.
looked at everything in a positive light. And there,
That's right.
are
Yep.
the
So this is the story of Yosef. Yosef sanctifying God's name in private. No one else is there, and therefore he gets God's letter Hey in his name. So I'm just going to make the final comment, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow, the day after, when we talk about Yehuda and his story. But the Gemara seems to be saying that Yehuda is on a higher level. Yosef was in private, so he only gets part of God's name, the Yud and the Hey. Yehuda is in public, so he gets the whole of God's name, Yud, Hey, and the Vav and the Hey. But if I were to ask you, okay, well, we'll see Yehuda's story later, but at this moment, which one would be harder for Yosef to withstand? If in public he's been asked to be with this woman, or in private? Private's much harder. So it's true, it's only private, quote, only private, but hey, it's in private, he could have easily got away with it. Right? So even though on the surface level of the Gemara, it would seem that Yosef is lower level than Yehuda, because he has only half of God's name, and it's only in private. But on the other hand, the fact that it was in private makes it easier for him to get away with it. But he didn't.
He's also in a lose-lose situation.
That's right. If he gives in, he loses everything. He doesn't give in, he ends up in jail. Right? But he decided to do the right thing anyway. That's a good point.
what was Yehuda's public?
We'll get to that soon.
Oh.
The Gemara is going to get to that. But I perhaps at this moment you can say that even though Yosef only has half of God's name, it's not only half. It's the fact that he has the higher half, the Yud and the Hey, which perhaps mean the level of godliness expressed in Yosef's name is only the higher half because it's too high to be denigrated to any lower level. So it's not necessarily a downside, the fact that he has half. It just indicates that his life reached the higher half of God's name, Yud and the Hey. So the fact that it's not that he only has half. He has the higher half. So it's the basic reading of the Gemara is he only gets half because it was private, not public. But perhaps we can say the fact that it was private, making it so easy for him to get away, and he still didn't, means he gets the higher half of God's name. Not giving it in the negative light, but in the positive light. Perhaps we'll explore that a little bit more. The difference between the higher half of God's name and the lower half of God's name as we compare Yehuda and Yosef's stories.
Yeah, because
We'll get to that soon, Gabon, yeah.
Yehuda's publicity was only because he was forced into it.
Okay, we'll see. Because he also was able to get away with it. We're going to see.
Oh, okay.
We're going to see. But when we compare the stories, we'll get to this. And we'll try to also reconnect it to what we talked about yesterday, the Yud and the Hey, making up number 50, getting the absolute truth, right? Without bias, we'll connect it all to that as well. Okay, wonderful day, Yidden.
Read off one.